Of the hour, so I'd like to formally welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is how to give the wow factor on email and live chat. Delighted to be joined by two previous contributors to the webinar program. Sandra Thompson from Exceed All Expectations. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you.
And Sandra, you've been in some exciting projects recently. I think you've been working with a utility company, which is a type tends to have its own challenge. Are there any other interesting companies you've been working with?
Some time ago, I worked for a football club in the UK,
Wow.
Arsenal, and that was really around their high-end. That normally gets a response from either the Spurs supporters or the Chelsea supporters. Anyway, that was really around their high-end product, and it was fascinating because the way they saw their channels was very different to any other type of service. They didn't see themselves in the service industry. So hugely exciting because I am actually an Arsenal supporter, but also exciting because showing them a different sector and how things are done in different ways. I mean, that's a bit of a showcase for me, but there's various others I'll mention as we carry on.
Wonderful. Also delighted to welcome back an old favorite, Mike Murphy from Genesis. And Mike, you're going to be looking at some of the technology for live chat and email and how that's really moving forward.
Indeed, I am, Dottie. Hi. Thank you for the old comment. I appreciate that. I will get you back for that. But my interest obviously and always is around technology. But I've got some thoughts today really around live chat and email, obviously in the contact center, and how we've kind of evolved our expectations, and a bit like Sandra alluded to, you know, the always on sort of syndrome affects everybody. So to that end, that puts demands on all of us. So just touching on some of those ideas in my little slot.
Excellent. So we've got a replay available. That'll be available later on this afternoon if you want to share this with your team. We're carrying out the discussion this week in our chat room. We've got quite a good number of people already logged into the chat room. That's at this address, callcenterhelper.com/chat. Does work quite well if you put the chat room up on one side of the screen and the webinar slides up on the other side of the screen. It works out quite well that way. And there's an added advantage, a couple of advantages being in the chat room, as well as carrying on the discussion with everyone. You can download the webinar slides. There's quite a lot of detail in the slides and some links to some quite interesting websites. So it helps if you can download the webinar slides. You'll be able to see those details. And there is also an added advantage that you can ask questions or tips. And in fact, the best tip that comes through today on how to add the wow factor on email or live chat, we do have either a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates or an Amazon gift card, depending on what works best for you. But before we dive into the bulk of the webinar, I'd just like to ask a question. And then what is your target email response time? Do you target answering emails within 15 minutes, within an hour, within 4 hours, within 24 hours, or greater than a day? If you'd like to put in the lowest setting on there. Sandra, what answer do you think is likely to come up high on there?
I'm going to back the 4 hours, although I would hope it might be 1. But given my own patience levels, I think I'd probably want 15 minutes. I think probably within 4.
Okay, well, let's have a look at what the results are. And this is fascinating. It's I think the last time I did it, 4 hours was becoming a favorite. We've got 4 hours is now probably one of the least common ones. It's either within 24 hours or within an hour or within 15 minutes. And I think that's quite encouraging to see. Mike, do you think there's a danger if you're not responding within 24 hours that you're actually just deflecting traffic onto other channels?
In a way, yes. I think it kind of, you know, with the expectation being that we're always on, we're always connected, really we should be looking at kind of like 1 hour would be I would expect, if you like, as the grace that could come with email, because it's kind of like that. You typically people kind of dump a lot of stuff into their emails. So instead of a message, which is short and sharp, they tend to be quite long and protracted. So I think an hour is kind of reasonable. But yeah, I think it's interesting with the shift. Like you, I was sort of expecting 4 to be a lot higher. Maybe I was expecting 4 to be the number that 24 is. So that's kind of a bit of a worry for me, really. But yeah, interested in the feedback, and thank you, audience, for sharing that with us.
Okay, so I think the first key takeaway there is if you don't have a target email time of less than an hour, if you want to give the wow factor, that's probably the first takeaway, that you need to start to move that response time down within the hour mark. I know that's difficult for out of hours coverage, but I think, you know, maybe you could change the metric to be within an hour of being of your opening time. So I think it'd work well.
I think there's a second thing in there, though. I think if you manage people's expectations that they will hear within a window of time, and then you are either within that or exactly on that, then I actually think that's okay. You certainly wouldn't hear from me again if I'm expecting to hear within a day, but actually once it goes just after that time, then I am going to try another channel.
Yeah, and certainly the greater than 1 day is rather worrying on that. So, okay, Sandra, it seems like a good time to jump across to your presentation and to share some of your thoughts on how to give the wow factor on email and live chat.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Brilliant. I want to just really start out by saying that this presentation is filled with lots of ideas from behavioral science, from neuroscience. There's a bit of psychology in here. And the reason why it's in here is because the last 6 months, I've kind of spent quite a lot of time looking at what the science is saying about language, about tone of voice, about simplicity. And those are actually the topics that I'm going to be covering. So I'm also going to give you some tips on a couple of books that you might want to consider having a look through, because again, with neuroscience, with the advancement of being able to watch the brain's behavior, seeing through MRI scans and stuff like that, it really is quite fascinating, the stuff that we're learning. So I'm going to cover words, I'm going to cover tone, I'm going to cover simplicity, and also follow-up. And I think another thing to mention to you is that while I help businesses with their customer experience, I also teach, and teaching people that are at university, so university and then also post-university, means that I get quite a lot of insight around tests that individual companies are trialing. So I know that some of the information I'm about to give you has been tested in industry, which I think makes it quite valid. So before I go into my first slide, I think one of the questions that's quite interesting here is, you know, why and what? You know, what is wow? What exactly does that mean? And interestingly, I think when we think of communications, we don't really need bells, whistles, and lots of lights. We don't need massive images, and we don't need different colors. What we need is what people expect, which is to have their questions answered, to go the extra mile in building rapport, and to make something really easy. And I'll explain some of the reasons why that is. So I think wow can be standing out from all of the other noise, all of the chaos that goes on out there, so that customers feel that they're really being heard and they're really being answered. And I guess the question is, you know, why bother? I think why bother? Because we have so much noise, we have so much to do in our own lives. When a company is able to express themselves and people feel heard, it does make them stand out from the rest of the crowd. And that was one of the things that came to me from some work I did yesterday with a utility company, where the language that they were using was very much their own cultural language that they were very much used to. So when I was asking questions around, well, what does that mean? And why don't you use this word? They kind of stopped in their tracks. So I think there's something quite valuable about just checking in, if you don't already, on what people think you are saying versus what you think you're saying. So whether you take a sample from some of the emails that you're writing quite regularly, whether you take some time out to just view some of the chat that you're actually undertaking, just a bit of a sense check from people outside. So a kind of objective view as to whether it can be much clearer. So first thing we're going to cover are words, and actually this is a really fascinating area I'm still learning a great deal about, but I definitely want to share with you what I know. Now, some of this stuff is going to be common sense, so I kind of make an apology for that, but I think sometimes we forget. One of the things I've found out is the appropriateness for the moment. So certainly people say that they much prefer informal. They prefer informal to formal, but actually if you've got a bit of bad news, informal does not work. You need to revert back to a more formal tone, because actually when you're informal and you have something to say that the customer might not like, it makes it even worse. And that's been proven through a book that is actually shown on this slide, that actually it makes it much worse if you continue with this kind of chilled out type approach. It doesn't work there. And I put two words in here, any and some. And then again, I definitely find myself doing this, and I hadn't really thought about the repercussions. But in actual fact, some science undertaken by some linguists that actually work in Loughborough University found that particularly in the medical profession and also in retail, interestingly, that if someone asks if there's anything else they can do for them, that is more negative than if you said something like, is there something else I can help you with? Who knew? But actually, when they undertook particular scientific trials, they found that the word some was far more positive than the word any. And the other thing which I've thought about since is if you're actually unable to help the customer in a way that they think is appropriate, if you have to ask the question, is there anything else I can help you with? That really doesn't go down very well, because ultimately the perception is, what do you mean anything else you can help me with? You didn't help me with the thing that you said you were going to help me with in the first place. So if you think about something else I could help you with, that might be a more positive outcome. Again,
and it's a bit like that word I apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused, which is, sort of any, may have caused, I've just told you the problem, you have caused it, and it's not any, it's for the inconvenience.
That's right. And I think, and interestingly, yesterday I was talking about this particular piece of science, and I found myself, it's obviously don't think about the elephant in the room, just like, oh, okay, so don't say the word any, and then I used it so many times. But if there's a way of weaning yourself off some of that language and just being more conscious, I guess, and just seeing whether or not it gets you better rapport, I think it's worth a test. Another word that comes out from this particular book is the word willing. And this is all to do with getting people to believe and to perceive that you're putting the control with them in making their decision. And what that basically means is that rather than saying, do you think you could, if you say, if you're willing to do something, apparently that changes the emphasis, and people do respond far more positively to that than if they would using any other phrase. It kind of suggests that there's a reciprocation, there's some kind of two-way conversation, and it's a connected kind of agreement. So I think that's quite interesting too. Again, things you might want to think about trialing. The other 2 points I have in this slide are really key. Having been a marketeer for about 17 years, and the need to use consistent language is really so important. So there will be, as part of your brand, a series of phrases, a series of words that you are highly likely to use. And I think as long as there is a understanding and they're simple, understandable terms, I think it's right that they're weaved into all communication. Again, I'm not sure if that's a wow factor, but I certainly think it's a consistency that people expect. And the final thing is around someone's own style. Now, I've certainly been on the receiving end of communication where over time, this isn't email communication, this isn't a web chat, but over time, the person I've been communicating with, I could sense that after a couple of emails, they started to bring their own style in rather than the corporate speak, and using just really simple language, which I found far more comfortable. And actually, it gave them feedback to say, do you know, your style over these windows of time have changed, and you might want to think about whether that's okay with where you work, because actually I find it far easier I find it much easier to understand and relate to you as another human being. So some other things I just want to add in on this particular slide as well is the order of the information that you give. And again, this does come down to the power of language, because again, from this particular book, it makes the recommendation that if you have bad news, you should give it up front. So if in chat or even in email, being transparent and honest and giving the bad news first and then the good news makes it far more palatable for the customer. Because otherwise, if you think about it, you give the good news and then they think, oh, here we go, it's coming. And then you give the bad news and then you close the email. The actual customer is left with the bad feeling. And again, from behavioral science, it says that the peak state should be a good feeling that people are left with. So again, going with the bad news first and then talking about the good news or how you can help or how you can work together to resolve it is far, far more effective. So a few things in that: trying the word some rather than any, making sure that the informal and the formal are mixed in the right quota, making sure that using the right type of language that's consistent with the brand, and how far you can go with your own particular style. There's certainly something in the use of language that gives people the impression that you are taking control of the situation for the customer. And again, you'll need to check in with the type of language that the customer is using. You know, what emotion are they expressing in their choice of language? So actually, if they are really angry, using particular language to empathize with that customer, to bring them down a bit from that feeling, could be hugely powerful. So really, it's just to check in on the language that's been.
And I guess the advantage with live chat and with email is that you've actually got that time to do it. Whereas when you're speaking with people, it's so quickly back and forward that you do have that little slight delay to where you can actually look at the type of language that the customer is using to mirror.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And interestingly, when I've spoken to some people who work in call centers, when they're reading what's being said, obviously they're reading it in their own head, their own voice, and the emphasis you can put on particular words means you do have, I mean, you know, you have a bit more time to at least process what you think is being said, rather than the instantaneous kind of thing where you have to react. So I totally agree with you there. You can be, I think, more considered. Okay, so if we move on to tone, and there's quite a lot of stuff in here actually. Again, another book you might want to consider, Tom Peters. Now, this is the point I was making just a moment ago around listening fiercely. Again, when you're reading, you're still reading out loud in your head, and sometimes I do read out loud from a communication that I see on screen as to what is the intention of what this customer is really saying, and actually what's missing from what they're saying. And I think this can be a definer for wow, because in actual fact, if you're really listening to what is contained within that paragraph or that email that they've sent, and you can identify particular emotions that they're bringing out, and if you're picking out particular signals from a chat, you might want to just address that. You might want to, if you're able to, if it's a company policy, to be able to say, you know, you sound like this has disappointed you, to just check in again so the customer feels that they're really being heard. And I think that can be quite powerful, and it is a very clear distinguisher from other brands who just go through the process of processing a particular call. I mean, there's a classic example in another customer experience book that I haven't included here. Actually, I can send it on, where a customer has given a really critical piece of information within quite a long chat, but the chat is moving at quite a pace because they're sending lots and lots of little pieces of information. And because the agent wasn't paying complete attention, they missed the line that said their husband had just died. But they carried on, and they missed out on that really critical piece, which meant, of course, that they hadn't picked up on that. They hadn't empathized. They didn't understand in context what had happened. So I think being able to really focus is really critical. I put something in here about matching and mirroring, and all that really means is being able to match the tone. So if someone is using very short sentences, or if someone's describing something at length, you might want to think about how you copy that in order to create rapport. And certainly I find that, because I write quite short sentences, someone who picks up on that, I think they're taking me seriously. I think they're dealing with it in an urgent matter. And if they actually don't match it, I think they're not seeing the significance of what I'm trying to say. So again, matching and mirroring is really powerful here. When I talk about leading with a positive tone of voice, this is more around the positivity of taking charge. And I think that certainly there's been a number of books that have included this type of insight, where while customers want to be in control, they absolutely want to know that you are sincerely going to take an action to resolve the thing. And that's really around, you know, I will be doing this. It's quite an assertive, without taking it too far, quite an assertive, helpful, instructive way. There's nothing passive about this. It's not a we'll think about or I might be able to. It's decisive. And certainly some types of customer types feel hugely reassured by that ownership. And again, while it's quite a subtle thing, I do think that that could bring a wow factor in. So that's also about taking the lead. Now, I picked up on this little quote here: just because there's nothing you can do doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. Oh, I missed off the do at the end there, sorry about that. The point here is, again, the outcome might not change. The actual agent might not be able to change the fact that the customer can't get what they want. But actually, if they explain the reason why, or if they explain the steps that will be taken, there is quite a lot of reassurance in there, and that's worked exceptionally well in particular sectors where there are financial regulations, where it's not the agent's fault, that's just the way it is, that they find a way to explain it in a different way, which is really quite compelling. And I do think that these actually do set people apart. The other thing that's quite kind of subconscious, and I'm sure you know this completely, but the point around using uppercase, you can see here I've used uppercase to make a point, but certainly within email and within chat, I'm not sure that you do it so much in chat, but within email, the use of uppercase is absolutely a signification of shouting, and people really don't like it. The other point is around the use of exclamation marks. I would be very careful about the use of that particular grammatical symbol, because sometimes it completely changes the emphasis of the sentence, and people can often misconstrue exactly what the agent is talking about just by one simple symbol there. So that's taking the right tone. The next point is around simplicity, and this, we talked about this earlier before we came online, but the actual art of being really clear and concise is a really difficult job. The fact that you work within an environment where you have all of your acronyms, you have all of the terms that you normally use, and you're really comfortable with them, and you often go into default, into the kind of subconscious, and naturally continue with that language, when in actual fact, it's not common parlance, it's not common language that people often use. And I was reminded of that yesterday when I spent some time, as I say, with a utility company, and they were showing me some of the work that they did, and I was, you know, whatever they all said, why don't you just say get? And there was like it was like a bit of a tumbleweed moment where I don't know why they didn't. I think they felt like they should continue with this term because it's a term that had been used for so many years before. And I said, but people, it's so much simpler just to say, go and get this stuff rather than on board or whatever the term was now. So on the point of clear and concise, I think the emails should be succinct and to the point. I think often agents worry that they're a little bit too, if they're too short, they're being abrupt. I think with the number of emails that people receive and short sentences and the use of bold, it means that you will stand out because you've been very aware that you need to explain something really, really simply. Now, there's a bit of science in here, which is a behavioural economist, actually, a guy called Daniel Kahneman, that talks about the brain working in two different systems. System one is the one that says, well, most of this stuff I kind of know, so I'm going to make a decision really easily, and that's nice. That's great. System two kicks in when system one can't figure out what's going on, and system two takes a lot of energy, and it's real effort, and it takes time. And if we think about our email communication, if we think about how we're responding to customers on chat, if they don't get what you're saying first time, or they have to reread what you've put because they're not completely clear, or it takes them longer to read what you've written because they've really got to put some energy in, that's not working. That's not wow. That's not really considering the amount of other stuff these customers have got to deal with, and the fact that you're helping them make progress and to move on. That's not happening. So I really do think that clarity, I mean, we think about some of the brands that are out there that are pure and simple. I mean, Apple, there's no coincidence that the simplicity of the design, with whatever you think of other stuff that Apple do, the simplicity of the design, the simplicity of the way the packaging works, the way that all the software works, it's really, really simple. Booking.com and their app, all these things are really clear, concise, and they work exceptionally well. So I think that the ability to review some of the emails that you send out, even some of your templated emails, to see how concise they are would be a really great exercise. And the reason why you have the cake on the front is that I was taught once by one of my colleagues that if a 9-year-old would understand what you're saying, then that would work perfectly. And in actual fact, I was given a bit of a gold mine yesterday when someone said, actually, how would you explain this down the pub? I was thinking, that's a good one. Because when you're having an informal chat and you're trying to explain it in a way that will engage, just have a think about that. Now, interestingly, when we had a conversation earlier, I was introduced to this particular tool that I think would be very, very, very useful to you. Jonty actually mentioned it a few days ago. So there's a link on this page to a thing called Gunning Fox Index. You can use that to input some of the language that you use, and this system will give you a reading age for the information you put in. And I think that that's an incredibly useful and objective way of getting people to reconsider how they put emails and chat together. So again, all you need to do is take a chunk of writing, text, put it into this particular, there's a big box that you can put copy into. It'll run some analysis and it will tell you which age would be competent to understand what's going on here. So, and I think if the age group is really, really high, you might want to reconsider that. The last point I've made here is actually very often for marketing teams that might be supporting you in your work. And this again is to get behavior change. Now, what social norms means here is really around the power to nudge people to take action. And I do think that the wow factor of emails and equally of chat is, well, how does someone feel about it? And then consequently, what action do they take after they've read the communication that you've sent out to them? Because after all, the wow is going to be measured by the end result. And if you've got some behavior you really want your customers to take, one thing is the simplicity of the message, they know what they need to do. And secondly, it's the persuasive nature of what you're saying. So social norms is basically this. Imagine there's a water company. Imagine there's a water company and they're trying to get you to use a water meter, and they've sent you loads of communications saying it's going to save you loads of money, and you've ignored that. And then they say it's going to help you save the planet, and then you ignore that. And then they say your neighbor uses this and everyone else along the street uses this. That has a massive impact because that is the social norm. And that's proven in behavioral science to be the magic formula. And it's the reason why the whole, please, if you'd like to not have your towels washed, please keep them up and don't put them in the bath. That didn't work. 76% of our visitors who stay in this hotel ensure that we don't wash their towels. That then changed the behavior, where more people felt the social norm was not to have their towels washed because 76% of other people that had stayed didn't do what they were about to do. So have a think about that again, just an idea on the types of messaging that you might use going forward. My last point really is around follow-up, and the reason why I bring this in is because, again, having worked in the marketing field and realizing that people are so incredibly different, and I was reminded of that, in fact, last week when I ran some workshops with some customers, and one particular customer was explaining how he read his bill from cover to cover, and he was disappointed to find that on page 3 of the terms and conditions, and in the 5th paragraph of the page 3 of the terms and conditions, there was a line that suggested that he could have a refund on these particular terms. My point of saying this is that the wow factor for him would be if in chat he had a certain amount of rapport with the agent, and the agent understood how he was a real detail person. How impressive would it be if that individual, that agent, then sent him a link to all the detail he could ever want to read, ever? Imagine how impressed he would be that, in fact, this person had listened to how he had expectations on the amount of information he would need, and that they recognise that, saying, you know, I understand that you want to know a bit more about this, sending it on, so things that people can look at afterwards. So I think that's around expectations, and I think that there are things that could be sent on within these two very different channels that can recognise how people operate and can give them more value, which doesn't mean they spend longer in that channel, but it does give them stuff to look at afterwards. The final thing that I know you guys are all already, only I know this from personal experiences, if you're going to do that, you just need to check the links to ensure that they're working. And obviously that brings about more contact if they're not working. So to round up, the use of language, the actual words that you're using, making sure that you consider, if you're able to, some of the science that's out there that is proving that some words are more positive than others, thinking about the order of the good and the bad news, thinking about how you might want to listen really carefully to the language in your head when you're reading through what you're about to send, matching, mirroring, thinking about how, while you can't change the outcome, you can change the way that the customer feels about you, and really either think about chatting to someone at the pub or knowing that what you're about to say would be really easy for a 9-year-old to understand.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that, Sandra. I think there's some great talking points on that. Certainly, I've got a few notes there. Is there something else I can help you with today, rather than is there anything else I can help you with? I think willing. If you are willing, we can sort out this this problem. I think it's a very good one. And using simple language, and certainly the Gunning Fog Index is a very useful way of checking the grade, which I think is equivalent to the year in school you get. So I think a grade of 13 is in the 6th form of school, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Quite interesting. We put some of our stories in this week into the Gunning Fog Index, and it shows up all the complicated things. Like one said, we can send a proactive notification, which of course makes sense when you talk in the jargon which I think just means we can send a text message. It's a lot easier to read text message than a proactive notification. So I think we're all a little bit guilty of dropping into the jargon these highfalutin words, which could be simplified, and it doesn't make us less intelligent to simplify it. It actually makes it's probably less is more, I think is often the case. Well, let's have a look at what's coming through in the chat room. And so we've had a question in from Kristen, who says, do you monitor chats, live or previous transcripts? Do you follow the same format that you use for monitoring calls? Mike, I don't know if you've got any advice on how scoring chats compares with calls.
Oh yeah, so Kristen, absolutely. So the technologies today enable that just in exactly the same way that you would do an audio conversation. You record, and then you take a selection of the recordings, and then you quality monitor how the agent or the advisor went through the response to that. So absolutely identical.
Excellent. Well, we've got a couple of tips here. Agent said a current initiative we're doing is simply picking up the phone rather than backwards and forwards over email. From experience, people can find their responses to the channel the contact was made on. We've seen an increase in Net Promoter Score and APS score. I'm not sure what an APS score is, and Adrian, perhaps you could clarify that. Sandra, in on email but out on phone seems to be a good idea to me.
I think it's great. I don't really know what to say. When I read it, I was just like, thank goodness for that. Again, it's another one of those. I'm being heard. They're interested, and we're going to resolve this really quickly. I don't think it's always possible, but I do think that if someone were to call me just to resolve something, I would be really impressed. Indeed,
and Adrian says APS is Agent Performance Score, so that's certainly a new one I've picked up today. We've had this tip in from Laura, who says, introducing yourself at the beginning makes your contact so much more personal. For example, good afternoon, Sally. My name is Laura, and I'm a customer support specialist here at TaxAct. I'm happy to help you out today, which I suppose is something we do on the phone, but on there's no reason why we can't do that on live chat. Probably no reason why we can't do it on email as well. Could be quite a nice personal touch there.
And it could also be a favorite, Jonty, and you just add it every time you answer, like an automatic favorite. So that's easy.
Could well be. Just got to put in the caller's name into it, so you got to make sure you've got the right or the chatter's name. Heather says, we find that canned messages on our web chat really helps with the basis on which you can remain formal and consistent across all your agents. But you always must remember to tailor the message to your target audience. I think there's a danger, Sandra, that if you're using canned messages, you can become a little bit over-reliant on them. So you send the canned message rather than actually answering the question.
Yeah, I think it's a real tricky one, actually, because I do think that there's something around the speed, and then there's something around the degree of personalization, and I'm not too sure. I personally think that it's great to have a bunch of or rather a range of messages that you can use, and I think 5 or 6 for different personality types. If they are your kind of canned messages you're choosing from, that's cool, so you don't have to originate them every time, but keeping it quite narrow, you run the risk of getting off on a bad foot, potentially.
Indeed. Well, we've got a question here for you, Sandra, based on your comment about using something rather than anything. Donna says, when looking to change the vernacular, vernacular being a common language, starting, is there anything I can help you with versus anything else? Do you test the language first to determine the impact, or you just go in and make all the changes?
So with the conversations that I've had with companies so far, they give this insight to a few agents and get them to use it, and then it's like a bit of a test, a bit of a pilot to see whether or not it works in that case. Of course, it's not scientific, because every contact has it comes from a different nature. The person who's communicating with you is different, the nature of the contact is different, but if they find that there is a more positive response to that, then you can roll it out. But certainly, check out the book. The evidence suggests that it does work. I just think there is something in me that would always want to test it before you roll it out, so that it's right for everything that you're doing.
And Laura says, Sandra, yes, always address when someone mentions a deceased family member. We deal with that a lot in my industry, and I make sure our agents always use an empathy statement, such as, "I'm so sorry for your loss." You really must address that. And I guess that's one of the problems if we're trying to do simultaneous live chat. It's very easy to miss some of that information, coming through. So.
It's a thing, you know, attention deficit is a thing. It's a real thing. And I think there is a real risk for people who don't have the ability to absorb stuff. So you're absolutely right. You absolutely do. Is it Laura? You really do have to address that. And I think if you take the risk, don't you, if you don't allow people to be able to focus.
Indeed. Well, probably a good time now to jump across to Mike Murphy. And Mike, I think you're going to take us through some of the ways that the technology is changing in live chat and email. So do you want to give us your thoughts on how to get the wow factor?
I will, Jonty, yes, and thank you for that. And just a little remark really on the sort of like listening fiercely, which I like that phrase, Sandra. It's like the you know, we are technically able to allow agents to handle multiple things at the same time, multiple chats, multiple emails and calls and things like that. So in a way, I suppose we are the root cause, I suppose, of some of these the dangers, I suppose, of bringing too much technology to the agent's desk. Now, you know, we can configure these to be a bit more careful, and I think that's a good lesson really for us all to kind of think about. And that is, yeah, speed and if you like, thrusting more work forward isn't necessarily going to give a great outcome for the customer.
Agreed.
So moving on to my little section. So I'm taking a technology view really on the wow factor for email and live chat. And this is again is like a combination of ideas really. And I think hopefully there'll be some content here that will trigger some value for you. I also have a video, which is going to be a first for me, so that'll be interesting, and we'll see how that goes. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about really is giving your customers the choice. So often I see the invitation for a chat arriving at various places on a website, and that may be deliberate, where the presentation, if you like, of the invite is only specifically for a product or only specifically for a language. Or it might be a more general sort of invitation to connect. But I suppose from our perspective, we like to sort of bring visibility and information to the customer, and we think by giving the customer choice, that empowers the customer to make the right choice for them. And you can see in this little sort of this little snippet that in this case we're able to kind of offer the like reveal to the customer a bit of a status check on our contact center. So what's the current wait time on chat, what's the current wait time on email, and if you like using this to help the customer choose, well actually I'd like to receive a call, thank you, because I want to talk about this in a very deliberate way. So I'll select that option and make a scheduled callback. In this case, we're talking emails and chats today, but again you can kind of see based upon how critical is this for me to my current issue, actually I'll wait for 5 minutes for the web chat because I actually want to get on with this issue like right now. And I don't want to sort of wait an hour or so or longer perhaps from the email side of things. So just an interesting tool that we're sort of bringing to our customers. The nice thing, I suppose, is that you can be quite creative with how you share it. So in this case, we're showing a very ordered list of channels. Obviously, you can suppress that back to just one or two, depending on what's right for you. Being able to sort of show it, if you like, on consistently across mobile is also very nice. So if I am on the move, or I was interacting with the brand this morning and we had a conversation, I'm on the move now, so I actually want to keep following up with my conversation so I can carry that on with chat. That's quite a nice thing for the customer to see. But I suppose there's a little test here really, and I think for the audience, are you courageous enough to kind of show your contact center performance to your customers as they're working through your website? So just planting that thought. And I've got some ideas on how you may want to work on that if the performance isn't necessarily where you think it should be at the moment. So bear with me as we get further into my presentation. The next slide really just shows you some examples of the brands that have adopted this technology. So you can kind of see there's a variety of industries. Clearly, retail is quite important, as well as utilities. But just to give you a sense of how other customers have deployed it, and they've selected under various conditions when they will not expose, if you like, the invite for the chat. So I thought that was quite interesting and should be useful for your customer, for the audience rather. And if necessary, we can promote this to taking a registration form, maybe filling in some information, giving the sort of tools to the agent to see when there are things waiting. If it's a case where we've got to kind of work across multiple websites, kind of helping the customer navigate perhaps through co-browsing, that's also quite possible to do. So just a capability that we call widgets. Okay, so it's nice and easy, but nicely adopted, and customers seem to like it. So hopefully that's been helpful. The second theme I wanted to talk about really is just more I would say the operational practicalities. And we had one question, if you like, in the intermission earlier, just with regards to this. I suppose I've kind of noticed that in the call center, which has obviously been around a lot longer, we have kind of learned their discipline around, if you like, being most effective and most focused on, the customer experience and the colleague, the agent experience. And we found that over time, workforce management or workforce optimization was essential to that. So I kind of just wanted to bring this notion into the idea of chats and emails. So, we record all digital channels, like was one of the questions earlier. So absolutely, technology is there to record everything, whether it's social, whether it's SMS, whether it's a formal chat, whether it's a formal email. The point is, we don't care as a technology. From our point of view, we record everything. But also, if you will, the notion then of like your quality scoring, that absolutely is kind of essential from our perspective. Whether that's done, as a sort of a sampling of Mike's work. So I'm going to take 10 of Mike's emails from last month and 10 of Mike's chats from last month, do a bit of quality control on those and give him some feedback. That's very sort of a typical capability, and very, very useful to coach Mike to understand where he may have sort of missed opportunities, or where he's got himself in a bit of like an earworm and he keeps using the same phrase, but actually it becomes quite irritating. So being able to sort of spot those and feed that back helps us all to kind of improve and become better, more effective, if you like, colleagues as far as responding to our customers' questions. The other angle, of course, is the idea of handling the volumes. So, we know from our work with our customers that just as much as they're handling volumes of telephony work, absolutely we're handling the same type of volumes. And in some cases, like we heard from one of the audience members earlier, they only work in live chat. So that's a very typical choice for deployment. But in the same way, the discipline of workforce management absolutely applies. So we're forecasting, probably expect to see by way of the volume of interactions today. We're able to assess whether we're adhering to that forecast, and are my people where they should be, and if they're not, why not? And therefore allow me to kind of bring that to Mike's attention. Being able to build the schedules for my team so that they know I'm working so many hours this week and I'm working so many hours next week. Holiday swaps, shift swaps, those type of things. All the sort of the normal things as far as we're concerned absolutely apply to the digital channels. So right staff at the right time, at the right place, obviously with the right skill to be able to give a great experience to your customer. And of course they will be monitored like we would in any other sort of interaction. We have to, maybe for compliance, but also as well to help coach Mike to be most effective. The point I made earlier about sort of exposing or if you like presenting the performance of your contact center live to your website, I think this to me is like I kind of feel pretty cool about it. I kind of feel this is one of those kind of internal tests that we should be setting ourselves as an operation, and why not? I kind of feel I have the tools necessary to be able to run an effective operation, and therefore, to me, that's kind of part of my sort of like a performance indicator for me, perhaps as a center manager. And if it's a case where the numbers aren't showing in quite a nice way, maybe your wait times are more than 10 minutes perhaps, or you don't necessarily feel comfortable in being able to share that, then I would suggest that we need some critical decision making going into those operations pretty fast. And a great tool for that is analytics. And the nice thing about this is that it's able to ingest all of your interactions. So, today just focus on email and chat. And the point is that this tool is actually going to absorb every single correspondence you've had with your customer. It knows the customer conversation, it knows the agent conversation, and it's able to kind of automatically, if you can imagine, quality control all those assessments. So I mentioned earlier about taking a sample of Mike's work for last month, and that's okay. That's kind of worked quite well. But often, if you can imagine doing all of Mike's work, that can be really just more effective, and that's kind of what analytics can help you achieve. But the beauty is that it can start to spot those little worms that I mentioned before, where we're seeing some irritants that, come on, Mike, I need you to kind of stop this and listen to what I'm asking you to change. And then, if you like, over the next week, I'm able to watch and see, has Mike adopted that request to change or not? So it becomes very, very effective. And also, it becomes quite powerful to give you the information to say, excuse me, managers, but you're asking me to handle these kind of volumes of interactions. They're increasing. I need some more resource to help me meet my sort of performance expectations that you asked me to achieve. So it's a good way to kind of give you the facts and figures to go to your board to say, I need some more funding for resources if that's necessary. I kind of see analytics as a very strategic decision-making tool. So whether it's kind of finding areas where I can improve my conversation flows, whether it's finding ways to assess my pre type templates. Are they actually working well for me or not? There's a variety, a very long list of good capabilities and good sort of outputs from analytics that helps you with those decisions. So think about that. The next thing I want to talk about really is it's kind of the third part of my presentation. This is where I'm going to introduce a video. But what we're talking about here really is getting interested in conversations that are happening with your organization, but at a point where the customer hasn't decided to connect with you and you haven't decided to connect with the customer. They're just online, they're exploring your website, they're maybe doing some, if you like, searching through your knowledge base and finding information themselves to their question. But what we're trying to do, if you like, as Genesys is be aware of that, if you like, be sort of cognizant of that, and perhaps, if you will, take the time and at the right point in time, if you will, invite to connect with that customer. So I've got a little video here which I want to share, and John, you could run the video. Let's get some ideas of that.
To you, Mike. Very
good, thanks, Jonty. Okay, and I think if I can, selfishly just take an example from earlier when the audience member asked a question about, or showing an example where they promoted an email into a conversation. It may well be that this kind of tool can help spot some of those opportunities. So just sort of think about that as a sort of an area within the contact center that we weren't before that focused on. But actually now, if you will, the kind of progress and the availability of information is allowing us to extend our reach into those sort of self-serve online activities and make sure that service is good. And obviously, in the context of the commercial side of things, the sales side are also good. So let me just move forward here. I seem to have a little stall. There we go. Okay, so what we kind of see with the with this little slide, which is my last slide, it just sort of positions that on the sales side of things, we're able to kind of understand what that customer is up to, and that's quite useful because we can spot the patterns, the good patterns, we can spot the bad patterns, and then we can take the one up at the right time, if you like, take the opportunity to connect with that customer, which is quite interesting. The commerce side is all about sort of shaping those journeys, and this is really helpful because you're able to kind of get a reading from your customers about how it feels to kind of go through your processes. And if it's easy, which is what we want to achieve, and it's kind of working well, that's cool, that's nice. But if it's starting to get difficult, this sort of starts to get highlighted here, and you can kind of jump in and make appropriate changes. It also helps your marketing colleagues to see how effective their efforts are. But I think from my perspective on the customer service side, it's really effective because again, I'm kind of conscious of customers who are under stress. They may have like open cases. They may be kind of working, trying to get updates. And I'm able to kind of see that, if you like, in automation and bring that to somebody's attention pretty quickly. So I think pretty cool and pretty wow factor stuff. So that brings me to the end of my slide, Jonty. I hope that was helpful. And I look forward to the feedback from the audience.
Thank you very much for that, Mike. Some great feedback there, and I think some very good points. I certainly like the offering the choice of channels when people connect. A couple of tips from the audience. Carla says, if your technology allows you to read what they're typing before they press enter, be sure that you take a few moments prior to sending your reply after they officially send you their question. A good school of thought is to read what they wrote again after they've sent it. Then press enter with your response. I think that's certainly a very good one of adding a little bit of delay in just to get the language right. Hannah says, think of tip, which is a similar thing. Think of sending a delayed email back as putting a customer on hold on the phone. If you know that it's going to take a while to collect the relevant information to address the customer's email, set their expectation. Give a realistic time frame in which you can answer their query. If you do this, always make sure you meet these expectations. Sandra, I like that one about setting expectations.
Yeah.
Anne says, we also offer to send an email with the information discussed while on a chat. It can be a lot easier for the person and less overwhelming. So I think that's quite a nice one. And Sandra, you had mentioned follow-up, which is very straightforward. Sven said, if you kind of use multitasking for the agents, let them decide whether they can take another chat conversation instead of setting limits. It will help them and the customers, especially in the case of tougher cases. Mike, I quite like that idea of letting the agent decide whether to take a chat rather than just checking 5 chats at the same time.
Correct, yeah, Johnny, and these are all, if you like, just like configuration choices, and you could have one team who choose to work that way, or one individual who choose to work that way, or not. So just really, if it's a smart piece of technology, explore it or ask for it. It should be there, I think.
Indeed. Hannah says, if you're responding to an email, always look at the language used by the customer and mirror where appropriate. It helps build rapport, and always confirm that the email has answered all the questions by saying something like, does this help? So sort of mirroring the language used. I think that was something that Sandra, you'd mentioned on your presentation, so great to see that being mirrored back. Barry says, use proactive live pop-ups to reach out to customers who are taking longer time to check out. This can give the customer the extra bit of reassurance they need to make a purchase. And we've got an opinion. Dion says, yes, Mike, I love how AltaCloud allows you to proactively reach out to your customers. And Dion said, Pure Cloud is a wonderful, powerful tool. I absolutely love it. So great feedback there. So you've got a couple of satisfied customers there. We've reached the top of the hour. What did you like best about today's webinar? If you could drop that into the chat room. Today's winning tip is Adrian 4, who says, tone of voice needs to be consistent across all channels, email, social media, live chat. We've created a TOV guidelines, and could be very good. Just a quick question: if you'd like to see a demonstration of the Genesys solution, just pop that into the box there. So if you'd like to see a demonstration of the software that Mike was talking about, just like that to vote that on there. And while you're doing that, just remains for me to say that if you want to watch our next webinar in the series, we're going to be back next week, where we look at 5 great ways to channel shift customers from phone to digital. So it could be quite a good one to do there. So just like to thank you to our speakers, to Sandra Thompson. Sandra, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
And to Mike Murphy from Genesis, thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonty. Thanks, Andrew.
And like to see everyone back in, I think it's going to be 2 weeks' time that